These two seem like many of the couples we see on social media, who chronicle their relationship for hundreds of thousands, even millions of viewers.
You want to marry me?
Yeah, are you asking me to marry you right now?
You gonna marry me?
Yes. We're married.
Okay. I'm just playing, though. I never marry your side. I love you, though.
No, you don't.
I love you.
No, you don't.
I like to wake up in the morning, roll over and look at you and be like,
So this is Ladarius Brownlee, who online was known as Dino, and this was his girlfriend, Saida Hashimi, known online as Zara. Now, they seem like a typical social media couple, right? Well, they were until last July when they made headlines. And not for their content they put out to their 150,000 followers on TikTok, but because Ladarius was accused of shooting Zara in the face. But his punishment might not be what you'd expect. I'm Elizabeth Millner for Law&Crime News. Now, it's a crazy jump from making fun social media videos.
this is why I hate going shopping with motherfuckers.
We stop it.
Motherfuckers want to stop at every stop. I'm talking about every last one of them.
No, I'm never taking you shopping again.
Nah, I'm not taking you shopping no more.
Show them what you got.
Then motherfuckers come here to get all the goddamn Christmas tree. Like, man, when I got this damn Christmas tree for my room, finna make me mad.
I am never
Piss
going
me
with
off.
you anywhere again because you do not let me buy what I want to buy.
Because you just be spending money on nothing.
Because I'm over here trying to shop and make the house cute.
This shopping right here.
We have to
okay.
feed the hungry.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you so much.
To being locked up, right? So let me explain. Now, most of us spend the 4th of July enjoying a day off of work, watching the fireworks, pretty much enjoying all that comes out of the holiday. And it seemed like Ladarius and Zara were doing the same. That is until Ladarius called 911 to allegedly confess to shooting his girlfriend. According to Flower Mound Police, the two were in a heated argument when they were walking back from the Flower Mound 4th of July Independence Fest. The fight reportedly turned physical, and Ladarius ordered Zara to go into the back of the SUV. From there, the fight only continued. But it took a turn when Ladarius allegedly pulled out his tan Glock firearm from the driver's door and fired it. A bullet hit Zara right above her right eye. By the time officers arrived, they found her lying on the ground outside of the car. Ladarius, for his part, didn't leave or try to flee and stayed there. And given that he called 911 allegedly admitting to shooting his girlfriend, officers arrested him. Meanwhile, Zara was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. Initially, her status was unclear, but thankfully, she survived. As for Ladarius, he was booked and charged with aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury and deadly conduct discharging a firearm. So that was back in July of 2024. Now, 7 months later, a stunning turn in the case. Ladarius pleaded guilty to the shooting, but that's not what's stunning. He avoided a jury trial and even prison time by entering his guilty plea. Instead, he just received probation. So that agreement happened all just last week. And he was released from jail last week too, where he's been since his arrest in July. Now, according to online records, Ladarius is prohibited from having a gun or ammunition. However, it's unclear if part of his probation includes that he's prohibited from speaking with Zara. But while their joint account is still up on TikTok, on their respective pages, it seems like they've scrubbed each other from those accounts. Let's break this down now with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Florina Altschiller. Florina, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get into this sentence, I gotta ask, what's your reaction to this case overall?
It's egregious anytime somebody is shot in the face, right? That's pretty horrific. But when we look at things globally and when we have more facts and understand what led up to the altercation, what was his intent? Did he mean to shoot her in the face? Was he trying to kill her? Was this an accidental discharge of the weapon during an argument? There's a lot of questions that are raised. And I think as we better understand those facts, there's mitigating circumstances that could lead to a plea deal. And other times there's aggravating circumstances that lead to a harsher sentence or no plea deal at all. So we really, on its face, it sounds horrific. It sounds shocking. I don't understand how anyone can get away with no jail time when you shoot somebody in the face, right? Like there's just no explanation. But when we look more globally and understand more of the facts, potentially there could be an explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask, in your opinion, is there any room for arguing this might have been an accident, or do you think that the shooting was intentional?
Right. And so I think there must have been facts that the district attorney's office had access to that suggested that either this was in self-defense or that this was an accidental discharge of a weapon, and that he didn't mean to shoot her in the face, in order to get to a place where he gets a plea deal that's effectively assault and a probation sentence. I just don't see how you get there if he intended to shoot her, did shoot her, and shot her in the face.
And I have a kind of a two-part question for you. Are you surprised that Ladarius Brownlee pleaded guilty? And second, my second question to you is, are you surprised at his sentence, probation? I mean, this is Texas. A weapon was involved. A firearm was discharged. I was possibly as shocked as you were that the ultimate sentence ended up being probation and no jail time.
Well, with a sentence that sweet, I imagine there was a commitment by the judge to a sentence of probation, and that would have been the reason that he pled guilty. Any client under those circumstances with that sweet a plea deal should plead guilty, because the exposure is state prison time, and significant state prison time. So why risk that when you have a plea deal that's to probation? Now, I will say a probation plea deal is not that rare for somebody where this is their first felony. So they don't have a criminal record for felonies. They don't have any history of violence. This is the first one. And there's other mitigating circumstances. So mitigating circumstances about the case itself, like we discussed, perhaps there was something to suggest that this was an accidental discharge of the weapon, and mitigating circumstances about the defendant. So things like, if there's, and I'm not saying that there is in this case, but these are things that would be considered: military service history, employment history, children that they are supporting. And so the thought is you're going to put them in prison, take them away from their children, away from their job, and remove financial support to children. I'm not saying that criminals shouldn't go to prison because they have kids that they support. But what I'm saying is, in situations where this is a first felony, there's a history of being a good parent and financially providing for their children, and there's no reason to believe that this is kind of a course of conduct that would repeat itself, judges are inclined to at least consider probation in situations like that. And of course, in Texas, as in every state, they're bound by the parameters of the sentencing guidelines, and they can't go outside of that. So if the sentencing guidelines allow for probation, even if that's the lowest sentence possible, but if they allow for it, then it's really not outrageous if a judge sentences somebody to that when the sentencing guidelines afford it.
And I do also want to kind of clarify something I mentioned. I said no jail time, and that's kind of inaccurate because he was in jail from July up until last week, when he was released from custody. Going back to last July, though, police say that Ladarius stayed on the scene after Zara was lying there on the ground outside of that car. He also called 911. In a weird way, do you think that worked in his favor when it came down to this plea deal?
Yeah, that's a fact that, again, suggests, first of all, remorse. Second of all, that maybe he really didn't mean to cause her the injury that he caused her. It's possible, and again, I don't know all of the facts, but it's possible, especially in a state like Texas, where the district attorney's office is pretty harsh and pretty strong on criminals and crime, right? It suggests to me that there was more information, that their case was not that strong on the question of intent, that they couldn't prove that he meant to shoot her in the face. And that's really egregious, right? Like, who shoots somebody in the face? You've got to think that they wanted to kill the person. And so I think under these circumstances, there was an argument, there was a weapon involved, not good facts, but that weapon perhaps discharged accidentally into her face, which is horrific. But in order to prove the higher level crime, they would have to prove that he meant to discharge that weapon into her face. And it's possible the facts were lacking there.
Absolutely. Because again, right in the right eye, just right here is just, it feels on its face, just very personal, very intentional. But again, we don't know all of what the prosecution or even the defense has to kind of counter that. As a former prosecutor, though, how much does a victim have in as far as their say goes in any type of deal that's made between the prosecutors and the defense? So, for instance, in this case, Zara, do you think that she had any say in this plea deal?
That's a great question. Most district attorneys' offices, and of course, all district attorneys' offices function a little bit differently, but most district attorneys' offices consider what the victim has to say. And they consider the victim's wishes in offering plea deals. There are times where the district attorney's office will not offer any plea because the victim is so staunchly against it. And then, in terms of sentencing recommendations, again, they take into consideration what the victim wants, whether the victim is looking for prison time or if the victim is okay with probation, or sometimes, depending on the crime, the victim would suggest something like, well, this person needs alcohol treatment or drug treatment or an anger management program. And those are things, so long as they're within the sentencing guidelines for the crime to which the defendant is pleading, the district attorney's office would consider recommending. It also suggests to me in this case that perhaps this victim was either not cooperative with prosecuting this, in other words, was not interested in testifying and having this go forward to trial, which would mean the DA's office would need to offer a better plea deal because they didn't have a strong case if they have an uncooperative victim, or cooperating in the sense that she wanted him to get the plea deal that he did get ultimately. And and when those things line up the way they potentially did here, this is the end result.
And it's interesting that you bring that up too, because, on its face, it to me, it did feel initially when this story had first come out last year, it did feel like, a domestic violence situation that kind of escalated. And so from that, my question to you is, what is it like kind of dealing with, interpersonal relationships or, boyfriend girlfriend relationship, something terrible and illegal happens, in this case the shooting happens, and then you have one side who may love the person who committed this crime towards them but is still kind of apprehensive as pursuing these types of charges as if a difference would be a stranger or something like that. But how difficult is it when you have these domestic violence or domestic partner type relationships? A victim used to be in a relationship with the person who is committing this egregious type of act on them.
These are the most delicate cases to handle from all sides because they're volatile situations. And judges are often very concerned that if they are lenient with a defendant who is accused of a violent crime in a domestic violence situation, that they're going to not only be a repeat offender, but that the next time they will kill that person. And so there's always a concern with releasing the person. Most of the time, especially with a felony level assault that's domestic violence, defendants end up staying in custody. They get remanded or they have very high bail. And so they're staying in jail, waiting for the case to resolve however it may resolve. Whereas if it's a stranger on stranger assault, most of the times the person makes bail, they have low bail, or sometimes they're even just released because there's not a concern with a stranger on stranger situation that the defendant is going to go back and attack that person yet again. With domestic violence situations, it is commonly known that there's a cycle. There's a cycle of violence. There's this love period, and then there's violence. And then it goes back to this love period. And then there's violence again. And that cycle doesn't have a set period of time. So sometimes things could be great. There could be this honeymoon stage for months, even a year. And then suddenly there's that outburst of violence. And the violence keeps escalating. So sometimes it's just words. Next time it might be a push or a shove or a slap. And eventually it boils into potentially one partner killing the other partner. And that's where it's really volatile and really concerning. And many times judges are afraid that they're going to release somebody on something that's maybe just a misdemeanor assault, a push, a shove, a slap. They release them back out of custody, and that person who did something that wasn't as egregious as shooting somebody in the face, right? Maybe just a shove, a push, a slap. And then they show up at the person's house and they shoot them in the face and kill them. And that is every judge's worst nightmare. That's every prosecutor's worst nightmare. That's everybody's worst nightmare. We don't want victims of domestic violence killed. That is horrific. So, in cases of domestic violence, there is always that threat, always that concern. The problem is, not everybody who gets into an argument or a fight in a domestic violence situation goes back and kills their partner. But the concern is always there. And so it's a balancing question, and it's a real delicate balancing question, right? How harsh can we be on people accused of domestic violence to make sure that the victims are protected from death? And are we making sure at the same time to protect their rights, because these are people who are presumed innocent until they're convicted of a crime. And the US justice system presumes anyone accused of a crime as being innocent. So do we just hold them in jail for 6, 7, 10, 12 months until they have their day in court and trial simply because they were accused of domestic violence, because we're afraid that they're going to go back out there and kill their partner? And there is no good answer, right? You're going to err on either imprisoning innocent people or letting guilty people go free. There's going to be mistakes being made, and neither answer is a good answer. We don't want guilty people going free, and we certainly don't want guilty people going free and reoffending. But at the same time, we don't want innocent people sitting in jail because we're so afraid that guilty people will go free. But it's an imperfect system, and there's really not a good answer.
Absolutely. And I think also, from this case, it feels like we're seeing, a lot of more couples this way. And when I say that, I mean, content creator couples, they make a following, kind of chronicling their relationships. And so it appears that if you just saw them based off social media, you would think that they were this loving couple, by all accounts. But what do you make of just kind of what it feels like this rise of social media content creator couples who appear normal on the surface, and then something like this happens where a lot of their followers are just kind of like, how did this even happen? You guys seemed so loving. You guys seemed like you guys were made for each other, that type of thing. But what do you make of just this whole content creation aspect to this case? Because they did chronicle so much on TikTok, on Instagram, at one point, even Facebook, I believe. But what do you make of that?
Social media is a lie. Social media is the highlight reel of positives enhanced through this rose-colored lens for you to want to watch. It's 10, 15, 20 seconds of happiness, and then the 23 plus hours of the rest of the day you don't see. Nobody is highlighting their struggles, their arguments, their fights on social media. They're highlighting the positive for you to click, for you to watch, for you to admire, for you to want to be them. You want to be the things that are positive. You don't want to be the arguments and the struggles and the day-to-day reality of basically everybody's life, which isn't always all that perfect or easy. So I think we subscribe to these social media reels and we watch them, and we watch enough of them that we start believing them. And then we sometimes even wonder, why aren't our lives like the 15 seconds that we just saw of the other people's lives, which we presume must consume the other 23 hours that we're not seeing? That is not reality. It is a lie, and stop subscribing to the lie.
Absolutely. And I have to sometimes tell myself that as well too when I get kind of zoned into my TikTok feed or my Instagram or anything like that. Florina, I want to thank you so much for your insight into this case. Before we sign you off though, how differently do you think this would have all played out had this case actually gone to trial?
It would have been in the hands of a jury, and people from the community would have been deciding this on the evidence that would have been presented in court. And we really don't know what all of that evidence would have been. And I tell every client, listen, when you have a plea deal, you have a guaranteed end result. You know what you're getting. We can always go to trial. That is your right to go to trial. You have a constitutionally protected right to be judged by a jury of your peers. We don't know who these people are, and we don't know what they're going to think. And it is a risk, and potentially you're looking at being convicted and then the judge sentencing you to the maximum. And so that's a risk that only you can calculate and decide whether or not you want to take. You could get the maximum, you could go free. That's kind of the world of options here. So that you could take that risk, you could go to trial, have the jury decide you're either going free or you're going away for a long time. Or you could take door number 2, which is a known end answer. And it's the plea deal with a sentence that we know the judge has committed to. So mystery door number 1 through a jury, best case scenario, you walk. Worst case scenario, you're looking at a lot of time. Or certainty door number 2, the plea deal. And really, that's an individual decision that only the client can make, and it's never an easy one.
No, not at all. And I'm sure Ladarius is probably happy to enter door number 2 in this case. Lorena, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And again, Ladarius Brownlee was released from custody on February 13th. At this time, it's unclear how long he'll be on probation. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.